The name of Andrei Chikatilo has become a household name in Russia. He is undoubtedly the most famous domestic serial killer. Perhaps Chikatilo became so popular because before his case in the Soviet Union, the crimes of maniacs, especially sexual ones, were not discussed by the general public. In a prosperous socialist state, moving towards communism, there can be no maniacs. This is a capitalist infection. A Soviet person is not like that. Approximately this point of view was promoted by the authorities. But this point of view turned out to be erroneous, and the devoted communist Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo turned out to be a serial killer maniac. In modern Russia, about people go missing every year, including children. They are not found. Listen to a documentary story about a Novocherkassk pervert to know the psychological portrait of a criminal. Perhaps someday it will help save someone's life. Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936 in a small Ukrainian village in the Sumy region. Childhood Chikatilo was at times strong psychological upheaval. Andrey's older brother, Stepan, went missing in 1931. Parents suspected that he was eaten by cannibals during the terrible famine in Ukraine in the 30s, about which his mother told little Andrei. For the child, this was an incredible pressure on the psyche. Perhaps he also played a role in the formation of the future killer. The Great Patriotic War began. Chikatilo's father went to the front, was captured. After his release in 1945, he was recognized as a traitor to the motherland, which, naturally, did not correspond to the truth. Andrei, still a child, disowned his father, admitting his betrayal, but nevertheless was attacked at school. In general, he grew up a lonely child. He did not have good friends, he was shy, timid. The teachers were surprised at my helplessness, Chikatilo said during the investigation. If I didn't have a pen or ink, I would sit and cry. Despite his congenital myopia, Andrei refused to wear glasses. He was afraid to be ridiculed, to be branded as bespectacled. In addition, for a long time, the teenager hid the problem of bedwetting, which still manifested itself in his adolescence. Needless to say, Chikatilo's affairs with the girls were going badly. He was very shy, rarely met, and if it came to bed, at the decisive moment he did not succeed. Several times he was ridiculed. Problems on sexual grounds, most likely, greatly affected the further life of Andrei and his career as a maniac. Subsequently, he will tell such an episode that happened to him in his youth. A 13-year-old girl came into our yard. Her blue trousers peeked out from under her dress. I said that my sister was not at home, she did not leave. Then I pushed her, knocked her down and lay down on her. I did not undress her and did not undress myself. But I immediately had an ejaculation. I was very worried about this weakness, although no one saw it. After this misfortune, I decided to tame my flesh, my base motives, and vowed not to touch anyone except my future wife. Another case that contributed to the transformation of Chikatilo into a monster. After leaving school, Andrei enters the university and successfully graduates. By distribution, he gets a job as a telephone engineer in a small town in the Rostov region. Chikatilo works diligently, having saved up a small amount of money, and immediately sends it to his parents. In 1962, his sister introduces Andrei to a local girl Faina, and soon she marries him. Despite the obvious passivity of her husband in bed, the couple has two children, Lyudmila and Yuri. Chikatilo loves his wife and children very much, is a caring, sensitive father and husband. In 1970, Andrei Romanovich completed a course on Marxism-Leninism and literature in absentia, received a diploma and got a job as a teacher at school number 32 in Novocherkassk. The teacher's job is not going well. Chikatilo is not able to control his students, they constantly laugh and mock him. Despite this unfortunate state of affairs, Chikatilo remains at work. As he will tell later, it was pleasant for him to be in the company of children, boys and girls. Facts are emerging that the teacher Chikatilo is harassing his students. Chikatilo is politely asked to leave the school, but the facts are not widely publicized. In another school, Chikatilo is caught in a more frank lesson. He tried to persuade the sleeping student to oral sex, but the older students who noticed this beat Andrei Romanovich. After this incident, there was always a knife in Chikatilo's portfolio. Soon Chikatilo and his family moved to the city of Shakti. It is there that the maniac from the forest belt, as the newspapers will dub it, will begin his bloody crimes. December 22, 1978, Chikatilo commits his first murder. His victim is 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova. Noticing her at a tram stop, the maniac lures her into his hut in the woods, promising to treat her to American chewing gum, a treasure for a poor Soviet girl. There, the killer knocks Lena to the floor, tries to rape, and then inflicts several stab wounds in the stomach. Chikatilo throws the half-dead girl into the Grushevka River, where her body will be found 2 days later. Surprisingly, the maniac could have been caught after the first crime. There was a witness of how Lena was taken away by a tall, thin man with glasses. Chikatilo was detained according to the composite sketch, but his wife Faina gave him an alibi that day. If not for her, perhaps the lives of another 52 people would have been saved. In the case, another suspect, Alexander Kravchenko, was brought in, from whom a confession was literally knocked at. Despite the vague arguments of the prosecution, Kravchenko was executed in 1984. And the real killer, Chikatilo, remained free. He managed to restrain his dire needs for 3 years. In 1981, another murder occurred. The victim was 17-year-old Larisa Tkachenko. The girl was, in fact, a juvenile prostitute, whose main clients were young soldiers. Going into contact with Chikatilo, she did not suspect anything wrong, suggesting to go about her usual business. The maniac spotted Larisa at the bus stop near the city library. He invited the girl for a walk, and she agreed without a second thought. Of course, she was not counting on the end that expected her. Chikatilo and Tkachenko went shallow into the forest, where the killer threw the girl to the ground, undressed and severely beat her. To muffle the screams of the unfortunate woman, he covered her mouth with earth. Soon Larisa stopped resisting. The next day, September 4, the body of Larisa Tkachenko was found. During interrogation, Chikatilo will say that if the first murder scared and embarrassed him, then after killing Tkachenko he experienced glee and joy. It is not surprising that after such sensations the maniac could not stop. In 1982, the killer has already committed 6 crimes. He worked out for himself a plan of action that practically did not fail. Driving around by bus or suburban trains, he looked out for single children at the stations. If it was possible to lure the victim into the forest belt, where Chikatilo most often committed murders, her fate was decided. The investigation was hampered by 3 facts. Firstly, crimes of this kind were new. There were no good specialists in serial murders in the Rostov police. Secondly, which follows from the first, the investigation believed that the killer of the boys and the killer of the girls were 2 different people. And thirdly, many bodies were found several months after the murder. Some were not found at all. It was difficult to identify and process them, revealing the killer's style. Thus, the case proceeded sluggishly. There was not even a suspect. The next year, Chikatilo doubled his bloody score, committing 8 more murders, among the victims of 4 children. The maniac committed all his crimes with terrifying cruelty. From the materials of the investigation, during the examination of the corpse victim, the following bodily injuries were found: multiple stab cut and cut injuries of the face, abdomen and external genital organs, 9 stab cut penetrating blind wounds of the abdomen with damage to the small and large parts of the intestine, complete cutting off of 8-part intestines and partial removal from the abdominal cavity with rough ruptures of the mesentery of the small and large intestines. 2 of these injuries were formed as a result of multiple, at least 18, 20, immersions of the blade with rotation around the axis at different angles. 1 stab cut wound in the right eye socket, 2 stab cut wounds on the right auricle. An incised wound of the tongue with a complete cut off of its tip, by making several sawing cutting movements in the transverse direction to the tongue. An incised wound in the genital area with complete cutting off of the scrotum and penis. 23 stab and cut wounds in the chest and abdomen. Disfigured corpses were regularly found in the forest belt. The situation was becoming critical. In September 1983, experienced Major Mikhail Fetisov and his investigation team arrived from the capital. Fetisov was extremely critical of the work of his predecessors, immediately stating that all the murders were the work of one and the same sexual maniac. In addition, he actively uses the concept of serial killer, which was previously presented as inherent in Western countries, but not in the ideologically pure Soviet Union. The first piece of evidence obtained during the investigation is a semen sample from the killer, obtained from the body of one of the victims. Sperm of the fourth group, therefore, the circle of suspects is significantly narrowed. However, evidence has the opposite effect. The suspicious subject was detained by the police on September 14, 1984. Subject introduces himself as Andrei Chikatilo. However, a subsequent check shows that Chikatilo has a second blood group. In 99.9% of cases the groups of different secretions and blood are the same, and he is safely excluded, however, from the party, released, where he goes to murder again. In 1984, the maniac committed 15 brutal murders. 9 adult women and girls and 6 children became victims of the maniac. In December, he moves to a new place of work, a factory near Novocherkassk. His position is associated with constant departures and business trips, which provides a convenient opportunity to commit crimes. Committing murders in different cities of a large country, it is very difficult to get caught. This was proved by the American Ted Bundy. The following year, he commits 2 murders of women, one of which is in Moscow. In December 1985, the Operation Lesopolos was launched, under the control of the Central Committee of the CSU. The new head of the investigative operational group, Isa Kostoyev, organizes patrols at railway stations. The best police forces and even vigilantes are sent to catch the maniac. However, the operatives do not know that Chikatilo has been a member of the vigilantes since the 70s. He too is on duty at the stations, diligently catching himself. The operation is taking place on a large scale in 3 cities: Shakhty, Rostov and Novocherkassk. In the course of the operation, more than 1,000 various crimes were disclosed. Over 200,000 people were checked for involvement in the case, and many persons with sexual and mental disabilities were registered. However, the culprit was not found. Kostoyev even resorted to the help of the previously caught pedophile maniac Slivko. However, he could not help either. It's useless. This is impossible to calculate. I know from myself. A surge of excitement around the case forces Chikatilo to be very careful. In 1986, waiting for the peak of the active work of the investigation, he did not commit a single murder, peacefully celebrating his 50th birthday, for the average maniac, by the way, a significant age. However, next year he begins to kill with renewed vigor, and will continue his bloody work for another 4 years. On May 16, 1987, while on a business trip in the Urals, Chikatilo kills 13-year-old Oleg Makarenkov. During his next business trip, already in Zaporozhye, he commits an incredibly brutal murder of a 12-year-old boy. The attack was so violent that at the scene of the crime there was a fragment of a knife, which was wielded by a maniac. The third murder is already in Leningrad. On September 15, Yuri Tereshchonek, 16 years old, becomes a victim of the killer. After the guy was dead, Chikatilo began to run around and shout, "I am a red partisan. I took the town. I have captured the enemy." As you can see, Chikatilo perfectly understood that while such a fierce hunt was going on him, it was better to commit crimes in other regions. As already mentioned, this tactic makes the work of law enforcement agencies very difficult. While all forces are thrown into the capture of the maniac in Shakhty and Rostov, he calmly commits murders in Moscow and Leningrad. In the 88th year, again believing in his elusiveness, Andrei Romanovich returns to murders in his region. An unknown girl in April, 9-year-old Lyusia Voronko in May, and Zhenya Muratov, 15 years old, in July become new victims of Chikatilo. All the efforts of the police are still in vain. The serial killer is at large. He begins the next year with the murder of 16-year-old Tatyana Rizova. The maniac lures her into the empty apartment of his daughter. She left her husband and lives with her parents, where he gives the guest vodka. Then he kills. A half-drunk girl is not even able to resist. Chikatilo dismembers the corpse with a kitchen knife, takes pieces of the body out of the apartment and calmly carries it down the street to the place of burial. Check him at this moment, the police patrol, and it would be over. But Andrei Romanovich is lucky again. In 1989, he commits 4 more brutal murders. He kills 19-year-old Elena Varga on the way to his father's birthday on August 19th. Noticing a lonely girl at the bus stop, he, in his favorite manner, invites her to his place. However, in the grove he knocks to the ground and kills. After stabbing the girl, the maniac cruelly mocks the corpse, cuts off the breasts, then wraps the remains in scraps of clothing and calmly continues on his way to the holiday. The bodies found by the police are often so mutilated that they cannot be identified. Even experienced operatives who had seen a lot were horrified by what they saw. The beginning of the new decade, 1990, becomes the end of the bloody revelry of the maniac Chikatilo. However, before he is taken into custody, the serial killer will commit 8 more chilling crimes. On November 3, the corpse of the 7th victim of that year, the victim of Chikatilo, 16-year-old Viktor Tishchenko, was found. Chikatilo decides to increase the number of police patrols. Small groups of plainclothes policemen, watching literally every suspicious man, carefully examine the forest belt and the areas adjacent to the railway stations. But, nevertheless, they fail to prevent the last murder committed by Chikatilo. On November 6, a maniac takes Svetlana Korostik from the Leska station. He takes her into the forest, where he kills. Then he cuts pieces of flesh from Svetlana's body, eats some. Having finished his bloody ritual, Andrei covers the disfigured and undressed corpse of a woman with earth and fallen leaves. It would seem that everything is as usual, but Chikatilo makes a puncture, which will cost him his freedom, and then his life. Returning to the station, he attracts the attention of Sergeant Igor Rybakov. The victim's blood remains on the killer's cheek and earlobe. Rybakov checks the documents, but the sergeant has no grounds for arrest, and the maniac is free again. Nevertheless, the meeting with Rybakov played a decisive role in the capture of the serial killer from the forest belt. Kostov stumbled upon Rybakov's message, an episode surfaced about a man with an inappropriate blood type and several more episodes related to the murders and Chikatilo. By order of Kostov, a special group of disguised operatives was assigned to spy on Andrei Romanovich. On November 20, Chikatilo left work. A boy, one of the victims, bit his finger during the struggle. Chikatilo went to see a doctor. Having made an X-ray, the finger was broken. Andrei Romanovich went in search of victims. While he is trying to take the boys into the forest, a surveillance group is watching him. There is no doubt about Chikatilo's guilt. On the day, the maniac was unlucky. One boy was taken away by his mother, the other could not be persuaded. The killer went to the store with nothing, to drink a bottle of beer. On leaving the grocery store, 3 men in civilian clothes approached him. "Are you Chikatilo?" Handcuffs snapped on the maniac's wrists. The maniac had a briefcase with him, in which they found a knife, a piece of rope and a can of Vaseline. After a search of Chikatilo's apartment, 23 more knives, a hammer and a pair of boots were found, a trace of which was found near the corpse of one of the victims. Elena Chikatilo refused to believe that the killer from the forest belt was her own husband, so gentle, kind, sympathetic. Her husband wrote to her from the detention center, "Now I would sit at home and pray on my knees for you, my dear. And why did God send me to this earth, so affectionate, gentle, caring, but completely defenseless with his weaknesses?" After that, a series of endless interrogations and investigative experiments began. Chikatilo was taken all over the country, to all the cities where he managed to commit murders. Once, when he was taken to the scene of one of the murders, information about this became known to the residents of the town of Shakti. Crowds of people gathered, and the police and prosecutors had to urgently call riot police so that people would not tear Chikatilo apart. The maniac confessed to his crimes, showed on a dummy how he cut, beat, strangled. However, by the beginning of the court session, he retracted all his confessions, claiming that he had made them under pressure from law enforcement agencies. The murderer's trial began on April 14, 1992. During the trial, he was kept in the KGB isolation ward, carefully guarded. Among the victims' relatives were officers of the authorities. The killer could be reached in a simple pre-trial detention center. While at the trial, Chikatilo was locked in a cell cage that protected him from the victims' relatives rather than from escaping. Speaking at the trial, the father of 11-year-old Ivan Fomin called to say a word for a long time, then pulled himself together and said, "I have a request to the court. No need to sentence him to death. Do not. Let it be 15 years old. Let it be less." But then from the KGB casemates, where they hide him for so long, he will get to us. "Listen, Chikatilo, what we will do with you, we will repeat everything that you did with our children. Chikatilo, we will repeat everything. And you will all, drop by drop, feel how painful it is." The lawyer Chikatilo showed his client as a seriously ill, unhappy person who needs urgent help. The maniac himself was diligently acting out of himself as insane. He carried utter nonsense, dirtily insulted the judge and the prosecutor. One day he pulled down his trousers and, shaking his cock, said. Despite all the antics of the maniac, he was sentenced to death. The verdict, execution, was greeted with applause. However, even after that, the killer continued to resist justice. Every day in the solitary confinement cell where he was kept, Chikatilo began with exercises. And then he wrote complaints against representatives of the law, investigators, and a judge. Before the sentence was carried out, Chikatilo wrote a petition for clemency to the then president of the Russian Federation, Yeltsin. But the petition was rejected. On February 14, 1994, Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, sentenced to death for 52 premeditated murders, was executed with a single bullet in the back of the head. In general, because of people like Chikatilo, it is necessary to change the criminal code. What do you, viewers of our channel, think about this? Write in the comments. And also do not forget to share this video on your social networks, press the subscribe button and the bell for notifications about new films. Please switch to other videos that you currently see in the end screens.